we're taking a trip way down memory lane and looking at some of the best video games of the year 2000. Now, buckle up, if all goes well, we're going to be covering a lot of years. This is our list for 2000. Of course, so many games are released during that year, we might miss some, so we're looking forward to hearing yours down in the comments too. These are our picks. Let's get started off with number 10 and talk about Gran Turismo 2. Released for the original PlayStation, this was a big racing simulation game for the time. Not only because I think personally, like more than the first game, this really paved the way for the future of the Gran Turismo series on PlayStation, it also looked incredible for the time period. Cars kind of had a realistic type of sheen to them. There was lens flare in the game. The rally races were unmatched at the time, probably some of the best rally races in a video game ever. The sense of speed was really solid. There were tons of tracks and different cars, and it just kind of had that Gran Turismo vibe. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's just kind of like a cool, loungy, relaxed feel. It was also on 2 discs, which, like, not to be weird, but like when a game came on 2 discs, you know it was a big deal. One disc had simulation mode, the other had arcade mode, and it was just satisfying all around and just a good racing package, especially for the year 2000. Next at number 9, Deus Ex. The original Deus Ex was what most people were playing on their PC in the year 2000, and for good reason. It was really, really revolutionary and incredibly unique. This was, of course, have to mention it, a Warren Spector game, a legendary developer who was involved in so many games like Thief, Ultima Underworld, System Shock. So with him and that, of course, Deus Ex definitely did things that a lot of other PC RPGs were doing, like branching side quests and narrative and dialogue stuff, and freedom of choice and approach to gameplay, stealth action, stuff like that. But it was definitely an evolution of the stuff that Warren Spector had done in the past, but people were really into it because it took place in the future and was steeped in this kind of cyberpunk aesthetic that was really intriguing at the time. Deus Ex, of course, was a big hit and was considered one of the best PC games of all time. It had a sequel a few years later that was kind of but then, of course, you know, it spun into 2011's Deus Ex Human Revolution and 2016's Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and that's where we're at now. And I will agree on this one, my memory is fading, but I do think the original was the best. Next at number 8, if we're talking about PC games of the year 2000, we have to acknowledge The Sims because it took the gaming world by storm. It was kind of brilliant how it took the concepts of something like SimCity and boiled it down to a family household. And of course, The Sims, you were totally free to build a house, build a character, and build their life. You have to dictate what they do. Take out the garbage, take a shower, go to work, what job they're gonna get. Are you going to have kids? Are you gonna send your kids to school? Are you gonna be an asshole? All of that stuff was absolutely great, and kind of working your way through life and getting more money and getting more success, building a bigger house. Of course, you could just use cheats and build a giant house with whatever you wanted. There were mods for the game that were a ton of fun. You could have Darth Vader live in your house. You guys probably know the hook of The Sims, the basic premise, but at the time, it was such a surprise because it came out of nowhere. It also really took hold in casual audiences. This might sound kind of weird, but like my mom played it, my dad played it. I went to school, I had friends, their parents played it, who never played video games before. Everyone was hooked on this game, and then the ensuing expansions. I still think the earliest days of The Sims were some of the best. I think just because it was just the sheer shock of it all and how fun and addictive it was to literally just live out a life on your computer. When really, if you think about it, instead of like worrying about someone taking a shower in the digital world, you should go out and take a shower yourself. I certainly did not, but hey, that's where we're at. The Sims 2, of course, would go on to really expand upon a lot of these things and just make it a truly great series. But like I said, just like the cultural impact the first Sims game had, we had to mention it. Because over at number 7, I mean, honestly, if we're talking about cultural impacts, CounterStrike released in 2000. Obviously, it's CounterStrike. You know how big of a deal it is now, here in 2020 even. As just a game that has had people hooked for like 20 years to also becoming a multi-million-dollar competitive franchise. It was actually developed, of course, as a Half-Life mod in 1999, and then Valve swooped in, hired the guys that made it, and then put out officially Half-Life CounterStrike. That's what it was initially called. That's what it said on the box. And the premise was then, as it is now, you know, counter-terrorists versus terrorists. You shoot each other. It's incredibly fast-paced, precise, and brutal, and really, really skill-based. There's bomb defusal, hostage rescue. Interestingly enough, when the game was first released, it was published by Sierra, and it was bundled with Team Fortress Classic and the Opposing Force multiplayer. Really, it was a very different time for Valve and all of that. It's just a very interesting history, but clearly the game was really good because it went on to sell hundreds of thousands of units in its first year, and then like crazy years after, of course. Honestly, for us here, we were talking about it, Counter-Strike Counter-Strike has a special place in our hearts, specifically because it was just this humble little competitive shooter game, and none of us had any idea where it would go. Look at it today. Now next at number 6, Diablo 2. We're talking about a lot of PC games on this list, I'm just noticing, but I mean, Diablo 2, man, come on. This hack and slash role-playing game is of course legendary now, definitely spinning off of the original Diablo. I'm kind of taking a risk in the direction it went, but it clearly paid off because people still talk about Diablo 2 and still play Diablo 2 to this day. It's still considered like one of the best video games ever. It was clearly like a defining point for Blizzard and its future. You know, the thing had free online play through Blizzard. A year later or so, it got the expansion, Lords of Destruction, and people were hooked on everything from this game, like from the aesthetic, the vibe, stuff like that, you know, to the actual addictive hack and slashy combat, to the loot, to the RPG elements, and just the character classes themselves, you know? Paladin, Sorceress, Necromancer, Amazon, Barbarian. We're really curious to hear in the comments like what you guys think about the history of Diablo. Do you like Diablo 2 more than Diablo 3? Some of us here kind of do. No slight on Diablo 3, of course, but Diablo 2, people are still clamoring for some sort of like remaster. As of right now, it's not really a thing like completely, absolutely modernized for 2020 PCs, but it's still fun, it's still playable, there's still that silly secret cow level that blew people's minds, and yeah, it's definitely just a special game. But over at number 5, if we are talking about special games, we gotta talk about Final Fantasy IX, man. The last Final Fantasy game to grace the original PlayStation. And it kind of marked a change in direction, quite a flip at the time, where the previous couple of Final Fantasy games were very sci-fi heavy in different ways, you know, some more than others. Final Fantasy IX went back to like medieval fantasy roots of Final Fantasy. And the game definitely kind of existed as like a love letter to the entire series. And it was just really, really good. Now, of course, it had the active time battle system that people were kind of really loving at the time. My favorite character was Vivi. Honestly, at that point, the 9th Final Fantasy game, it had a lot of the tropes that Final Fantasy games had. It had the modern elements that had been set up by the previous games, but it was just a really tight package. It was just perfect in a lot of ways. Like I said, a lot of people consider it one of the best Final Fantasy games or one of the more underrated ones. It's also an incredibly successful one. It went on to sell over 5 million copies just on PlayStation alone. And now, I mean, honestly, if you're curious, this thing is playable on a lot of things, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Now, coming down to number 4, we want to talk about a video game that is very significant to video game history, and that's Phantasy Star Online, which was released for the Sega Dreamcast and was actually the first online RPG on console. And it was the real deal. Like, you created a character, you picked from different races, you had classes, and then you just jumped in and played cooperatively with other people. You could play it offline, of course, but a lot of people opted to play it online. And even though communication was limited at the time, you could chat with a keyboard. It was definitely rough in a couple of ways, but people absolutely fell in love with it. It's kind of like EverQuest, but for anime fans. And it was a full-fledged, solid action RPG and paved the way for eventually the even bigger and better Phantasy Star Online 2. Now, coming down to number 3, we have a surprising and unique game that blew away a lot of people, and that's The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Essentially, it's like the anti-hero to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time in a lot of ways. This game was moody, it had a darker, deeper aesthetic. It had a very stressful kind of end-of-the-world mechanic where you had to race against time, which was very unique for a Zelda game. It took the mask systems and made them like a full-fledged main concept for the game that you had to embrace. You had to transform in certain sequences to solve things. Like I said, the time mechanic was incredibly stressful though. You had 72 hours to save Termina because that big scary freaking moon was going to crash into it. There was, of course, a Song of Time and changing time and shifts and stuff that were involved, but we were also introduced to here, of course, to like the iconic looks with the masks, but most importantly, Skull Kid. Starting as something that was just kind of briefly seen in Ocarina of Time, he became a fully fleshed out thing, and basically the cause for this whole curse facing Termina in Majora's Mask. And also, I just want to point out, like, I was young at the time, I just thought he looked really cool. Some people think Majora's Mask is the best Zelda game. It definitely scores points for being completely different and overhauling a lot of concepts. I think that's a big thing. I definitely want to hear from you guys in the comments. What's your favorite Zelda game? Is it Majora's Mask? If it is, let us know why. But down at number 2, we have one of the biggest hits for the Nintendo 64 at the time, Pokémon Stadium, which was kind of like a kid Pokémon fan's dream come true. It hit at the right time. We were all addicted to Pokémon, of course, playing Red and Blue and stuff like that. Now Pokémon Stadium dropped on Nintendo 64, and thanks to the Nintendo 64's 3D graphics, we were able to actually experience real action Pokemon battles in this strategy game. Now really, there was no story or anything. It was really just pretty much about the battles. You would fight your way through 4 cups and then of course work your way through the gym leaders. Honestly, at the time, looking back, the whole thing was really simple, but like I said, the appeal was really just seeing your favorite Pokemon rendered in 3D doing their thing, kicking ass. There were some fun mini games too that definitely kept me hooked for a while, but really, like I said, it just hit at the right time for Pokemon Mania. In the first month alone, it sold over 1 million copies. We all loved it. Curious to hear if you guys did too. Now down at number 1, our bias might be showing here a little bit, but Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. This was the big one. Now while of course the first one was revolutionary, 2 is where things really exploded. It was ultimately just a way more refined game, a stronger package in the sense that it had more licensed tracks, updated graphics, more tricks and moves. The manual was introduced. Then of course, Create a Skater was introduced, which was huge. And it had a level editor, which for the time was pretty limited, but it was so much fun. Tony Hawk had a lot to it. Of course, it had modes you could play through by yourself, and then it had really compelling multiplayer modes like playing horse or going for a timed high score. But playing career mode was the most fun, you know, just trying to find all the gaps, getting the high score, getting all the cash, finding the secret tape. All of that in one shot was just so addicting because the skate gameplay was so great. The foundation set up in the original game really paved the way for both Tony Hawk 2, probably to Tony Hawk 4, to just really consistently innovate and become a legendary series that we still miss to this day. It topped the charts consistently for a long time after release. And not to get weird, but for a second, it actually introduced a lot of kids to, number 1, skateboarding, and number 2, some really cool music they wouldn't have heard otherwise. And the actual game itself, like I said, was really awesome, so we applaud it for all of that stuff. Now before we go, we do have some bonus games we want to mention, of course, including Paper Mario, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Command & Conquer Red Alert 2, and believe it or not, Perfect Dark. These are what we think are some of the best, some of the most important games released in the year 2000. But of course, like I said, we want to hear your list down in the comments. If you were alive in the year 2000, you definitely probably played at least 10 games, so give us your list. Be sure to share any memories at all down in the comments. We would love to hear from you guys. Thank you for taking this trip down memory lane with us. If you enjoyed this video, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. And if you're new, maybe consider subscribing because we put out new videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.